BG3's patch 8 has just released, featuring 12 new subclasses, one for each class, which gives us as players tons of new stuff to mess around and play with. Similar in theme to the Warlock's Hexblade, the new Shadow Magic Sorcerer wields magic from the Shadowfell to manipulate and destroy their foes. While this subclass has all sorts of darkness-related goodies, there's one feature in particular that drew my attention, the Hound of Ill Omen, unlocked at level 6. Similar to the Hexblade's Accursed Spectre feature, the Hound of Ill Omen has been somewhat homebrewed and adapted to work better in its implementation in Baldur's Gate 3. In tabletop D&D, the Hound of Ill Omen functions as essentially a different and stronger variation of Sorcerer's heightened spell metamagic. And I was curious to see how they would adapt this and all of its features to BG3 as a dedicated, unique summoned unit. So the Hound itself, lovingly named Nimbus, is summoned for 3 sorcery points and a bonus action, which is very strong action economy-wise. It comes with a couple of unique attacks that provide some unique utility to the Sorcerer. First and foremost, its default attack is known as Ominous Bite. The attack itself has a notably strong 3d6 base piercing damage, and has a chance to apply an omen to your target. This omen is a debuff that will randomly pick an elemental type. If that enemy takes damage of that element while the omen is on them, you'll recover 1 sorcery point. So, for example, Nimbus attacks and applies an omen of fire to the enemy. If that enemy is then hit by fire damage, the omen will be consumed and you get 1 sorcery point back, which is pretty cool. The next attack your little shadow creature can use is Umbral Tangle, which is an area of effect entangle to all enemies who fail its strength saving throw. This does 2d6 necrotic damage on its own, which will be halved on a successful save, and you can do this every single turn with the Hound, so it's pretty decent AoE and utility all things considered. While I think both of these attacks will feel very powerful if unlocked at level 6, the Hound itself does not scale with your level whatsoever, meaning that his usefulness will fall off later into the game. I'll be honest in saying that in my brief testing during Act 3, it didn't feel particularly useful on its own, but that largely comes down to its lack of scaling. It shouldn't really be viewed as a primary source of damage, and rather just something that's nice to have as a sorcerer, which is already a very, very strong base class in BG3. However, there is one more feature possessed by our friend Nimbus that makes things much more interesting. Splinter Shadow is a reaction that will trigger when Nimbus is hit by a melee attack, notably one that does not deal radiant damage. This reaction will splinter off a fragment of the Hound, summoning a smaller, weaker, splintered Shadow Hound that shares both this reaction and the Umbral Tangle ability. These weaker hounds cannot be controlled by you, the player, but since these Shadow Hounds have this reaction themselves, it's possible to create a large army of little shadow doggies, assuming your enemies are not outright killing them in one hit. Now, I found this very exciting, and it reminded me of the ability to duplicate and summon a ton of Accursed Spectres on Hexblade Warlock. Since both of these features are acquired at level 6, this does mean that you can make a level 6 Hexblade, level 6 Shadow Sorcerer multiclass, and actually gain access to both of these features on the same character. And after testing this to see if it was any good, I found something very interesting. You see, if both an Accursed Spectre and a Hound of Ill Omen exist at once in relative proximity to each other, they will share the Shadow Infusion feature with one another. And what this feature will do is it will share each summon's respective reaction ability with the other. So our Hound of Ill Omen is gaining the Right Behind You feature, and the Hexblade's Accursed Spectre will gain this Splinter Shadow reaction. For those of you that haven't watched my previous video on stackable Hexblade summons, I will leave it in the description below. It goes into a little more detail on how Hexblade Spectres actually work, but put briefly, the Right Behind You feature will trigger when you, the player, attacks an enemy with your hexed weapon. When this reaction is triggered, your spectral friend will teleport to your target and attack them with their claws for necrotic damage. And with the Shadow Infusion feature, your little shadow doggy can do this too, which is kind of neat. However, the more significant interaction is the fact that the Hound's Splinter Shadow reaction is shared with your Spectres, which means that you can stack and summon even more Spectres. The Spectres and Splintered Hounds that are spawned from this will also inherit these reactions too, which spreads it like a virus between all your little shadow guys. In tandem with the Hexblade's curse itself, this gives you yet another way to amass a giant army of accursed specters, and it's kind of ridiculous, honestly. Now, the question remains, is this actually good? And my answer is, I don't know. This is a very steep investment cost for a single build, and for this exact interaction to occur, you need to be a max level character. I suppose in a party where you have one level 6 Hexblade and one level 6 Shadow Sorcerer, you could get this combo online much earlier in the game, but this is assuming that the Shadow Infusion buff is shared between summons of differing players. While these summons on their own aren't particularly powerful because they don't scale with level, there are a ton of effects in the game that you can use to help bolster their power. Things like Fairy Fire can help to ensure they hit their foes, buffs like Aid can help scale their HP, even weapons like Phalar Aluv's iconic Sing and Shriek features can work wonders for an army of summoned units. You have options as a player here to help these guys stay relevant, and it's undoubtedly a very unorthodox playstyle, which you might find fun. One of my biggest gripes with Baldur's Gate 3 from a playstyle perspective is its relative lack of dedicated summoning options. Very few subclasses are capable of building into summons. Most of them that actually have access to summons usually just kind of have them tacked on in their spell list somewhere. But with the addition of patch 8, we now have quite a few more summoning options to poke around with and experiment with. I found it very exciting so far, and I'm really looking forward to bringing one of these builds along to my next actual playthrough. So if this looks fun or interesting to you, well, maybe consider giving it a try yourself as well.